I think that we should think of our diet as enslaved from the past all the way up into the present and still going on into the future. And that will help us understand why our health is the way it is, at least in pertaining to diet.
Welcome to the Public Health Millennial Career Stories podcast, episode number 8. So, as you all can see, I am changing up the format of the podcast. I'm really excited to change it up, and I'm glad to be bringing this guest today. Not only does he, yes, my first male guest, he talk about his journey in his bachelor's and how he's getting his PhD. Well, going to start his journey to his PhD now, but we talk about a lot of Black issues, not really the ones surrounding George Floyd, but just other issues that do surround the Black community, and really just dive through his life experiences coming from a non-traditional background with a single mother and in a very small place in Oklahoma, and not really knowing much about the global landscape until he got into Cornell and was able to expand his horizons and really understand and just look at the world from a different mindset, I should say. But before we get to that, I'm going to be doing a giveaway for my website, The Public Health Millennial. So if you're interested, definitely go across to my Instagram page, The PH Millennial, and follow the rules that I'm about to say. But the giveaway is going to last from Tuesday, 23rd of June, all the way to the 30th of June, 11:59 p.m. Eastern, 2020. So you can enter by following me on Instagram, liking the photo and tagging 2 friends, and I'll give you 1 entry. You can follow my newsletter and I'll give you 5 entries, or you can review the podcast, take a screenshot and send it to me either on Instagram, LinkedIn, or my email, thephmillennial@gmail.com, and that will be 3 entries. If you want to check out what the jersey is, just check out Instagram. It's going to be like a jersey and it's going to say prevention over treatment. I think it looks pretty cool. And it has like my Instagram tag, the PH Millennial. So definitely check that out. But I hope you enjoy this episode. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed as yet. Leave a review, and there's an incentive. You can get entered to win a t-shirt, and definitely share this with a friend. Thank you so much for logging in. Appreciate it. This is the Public Health Millennial Career Stories podcast, where you'll hear about diverse career stories, career strategies, get tips, and learn from others to help you in your public health career journey. If you want to learn about public health careers, or just hear public health stories, stay tuned because you won't want to miss this. Today we have my first male guest, hailing from Oklahoma, a Kessler Scholar recently graduating with a double major in Global and Public Health Sciences and Developmental Sociology from Cornell University. Having research experiences in Zambia as well as Malaysia, after recently graduating from his undergraduate, he will be pursuing a PhD in Sociology and Demography at the University of California, Berkeley. We have Benjamin Fields, PhD student, BSc. I don't know, I always get caught up by those little things at the end, the bachelors and stuff. So the quote for today is by Michael Marmouth, who is a public health professional hailing from England, and he is or was the president of the World Medical Association. And the quote goes, "Health inequalities and the social determinants of health are not a footnote to the determinants of health. They are the main issue." And this is something that I really wanted to talk about. And I'm glad to have Benjamin here, an aspiring sociologist slash public health professional. I just really want to hear his perspectives and hear what he has to say. So welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hello, thank you for having me on. I'm doing well today. I think that while it's unfortunate that everything that's been going on, I think it's definitely helped boost my understanding of sociology and public health, and it's really made me pay attention to some of the social determinants of health and some of the intersectional identities that can exacerbate some health issues. And so, while I'm not doing necessarily good within the current environment, I think that it's been a good learning experience for me, and it helps motivate me to go into the future. So I'm feeling optimistic.
Okay, and that's a great feeling to have, especially with all this uncertainty going on. So I just wanted to say congratulations. I know you're a recent graduate. How has that online graduate experience been?
Thank you. The online graduation experience has been a little tough, I think. I live at a non-traditional home setting. I live with my grandparents, my mom, my brother, and then my cousin staying with us. And so, you know, having to share rooms with like multiple people and having to watch every step that I make, because of the people who are at risk at home makes things a lot much more difficult in terms of school. But I think I was still able to finish strong, and I'm looking forward to starting my next step in schooling.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And going off of that, tell us a little bit about your personal story.
So I guess my personal story, I'll keep it short. I was born in Norman, Oklahoma, and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I grew up in a single parent household with my mom, and then we also stayed with our grandparents and our auntie. And it's me, my mom, and my brother. I went to Union School District. I ran track ever since I was younger. I remember in high school, I used to want to just be a I didn't really know much about sociology or public health, and so I just wanted to be, like the typical doctor, lawyer, engineer, etc. And once I came to Cornell, I had never left the southern region before I went to school, and I've got to travel and do so many things, learn about history, and so ever since then, like that's just shaken up the whole way that I've thought. And going into the future, I guess my personal story includes that I've changed my aspirations, and now I really want to get into social justice, public health, ensuring equality of opportunity, things like that.
Okay, and I hope we can dive into a couple of those things today, definitely. Thank you for sharing. So I just wanted to give a little definition of public health and sociology. I don't know if I'm going to batter this, or you probably have a better. I should have asked you to do this, but I did it anyway. Um, so, public health has been defined as the science and art of preventing disease, prolonging life, and improving quality of life through organized efforts and informed choices of society, organizations, public and private communities, and individuals. Sociology, on the other hand, is a study of society, patterns of social relationships, social interaction, and culture that surrounds everyday life. It is a social science that uses various methods of empirical investigation and critical analysis to develop a body of knowledge about social order and social change. The emphasis on society rather than the individual. The individual is viewed as an actor within the larger social processes, and this distinguishes it from the field of psychology. The emphasis is on the unit of analysis as a collective, such as the family or the group, the neighborhood, the city, the organization, the state, or the world. In sociology, the key importance is given to how the social fabric or social structure is maintained and how social processes such as conflict and resolution relate to the maintenance and change of social structures. A sociologist studies processes that create, maintain, and sustain a social system such as the healthcare system in a particular country. Though public health was initially more governed by the focus of individual behavior and thus aligning more with psychology, public health has shifted to focus on a sociological perspective nowadays. And do you have anything to add to that, possibly?
No, I think that's a pretty accurate representation of what's going on. I think overcomplicating the definition leads to a lot of semantics and arguments. So I think that that was a pretty good sum up of what sociology and public health are.
Okay, so where did your journey with sociology and public health begin? Actually, tell us about how you got to Cornell. What was your journey to get to Cornell?
Um, it was a pretty non-traditional journey. I just whenever I was in high school, the idea of going to an elite school like Cornell was just really I mean, I really didn't know much about it. You're not really exposed to it. It's not really considered a possibility. And so I just went on assuming that just have to be an athlete if I want to go to school. And I ran track and I played football. I wasn't really that good at football. So I decided to let my brother have that. He's super good and I'm proud of him. I just decided to keep doing track. And eventually I got good enough to get recruited. But then, some complications happened. And for some reason, I wasn't getting recruited. And in my senior year, I just happened to get a letter in the mail from Cornell. And then I had a dream about it. So I just decided to reach out to the coach and I was recruited, went to Cornell. And that's pretty much the story. There was no I mean, I didn't really even know what Cornell was until like probably the beginning of my senior year, and I didn't even really think I was actually going to get in until it actually happened, even though I was recruited. And so, that's my that's my Cornell journey. Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing. That's cool, and I'm glad that you persevered. And I think that's a challenge, especially for a lot of Black males coming up, not really knowing about university and going to university and thinking about that. It could be it could seem so far away and so like a distant world. Um, so what was the Kessler Scholarship about? Did you get that before you came to Cornell, or did you get that during your time at Cornell?
So I myself am not personally a Kessler scholar. It's a mentoring program that was started by Fred and Judy Wilpon at the University of Michigan, and they expanded it to Cornell. This was the first year, and I was chosen as one of the mentors for the program. And it's just a program that helps bring in freshman students who are first generation low income, who don't really have like that social and cultural capital and don't really have the same kind of support networks as students from affluent backgrounds or other, privileged backgrounds. And so it's a mentoring program that tries to pull them in, and it adds economic support or financial support, mentoring support, social support, etc. Connects them with opportunities and tries to increase the retention of these students, and also make sure that the students are taking advantage of things at the same level that other students are.
Okay, okay, that's great. I didn't know that you weren't part of it, but you're only a mentor. But that's good that you're helping others, and it's definitely something that I wanted to talk on because the your thesis that you sent me is like I read it probably two times. There are definitely some things that resonate with me because I come from a very untraditional background in a different sense from you, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But so why did you decide to pursue a bachelor's in global and public health and developmental sociology?
hmm I think that normally I would probably leave this element out, but I think I want to kind of humanize myself. Whenever I was going into Cornell, I didn't really know what sociology was. I really didn't know what psychology was, economics was. Like I was not prepared for any of that. And so when I went in, I just wanted to be like a celebrity plastic surgeon because I knew they wanted to. I knew they made a lot of money, and, and so I started taking the pre med classes, and I didn't do that well. Rightfully so. I wasn't really passionate about the classes, and I didn't really care for them that much. And so I switched to something that could keep me related to health, but could put my opportunities in terms of employment in a something that's more like comfortable with like the type of person I am. And so I decided to do global and public health because I wanted to pursue a job at like the UN or the World Bank or some other large organization like the World Health Organization. And I started really becoming interested in international issues because when I say that I didn't really know much about anything when I came from high school, I mean, I had no idea what Southeast Asia was. I mean, I had no idea about like different countries and all over the world and all this stuff. And so as I learned more and more about it, because I had taken a couple of those classes as electives when I was pre med, I just really started to like it a lot. And so I shifted to global and public health, and I started taking some classes in development sociology, which are very similar. It kind of, I, in my head, I view public health as the applied development sociology. Development sociology is like looking at trends, theories, patterns, etc. And so they complemented each other, and I decided to do both. And then I really became invested in it. I started doing the international research programs. I started independently reading books about history in Africa, about migration, about all types of things, civil rights movement and everything. And so I just really became invested in that so much. And then that's basically my personal journey into sociology and public health.
Okay, and you talked on some international. Actually, before we get into that, I want to know what was it like to because you said you weren't really equipped to start university. So how did you adjust and how did you get the most of it? Because I'm talking to someone that I would view as successful right now. So how did you get the best of it?
Thank you. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I believe in trial by fire and not giving up. So when I first went to Cornell, I mean, my first semester I got C's, my second semester I got C's, my third semester I got C's, and I just kept trying to find ways. Well, I can't really go back and change the grade that I got in a class, but I can take courses in the future that I'm more interested in. I can take more courses in the future to try to make up in my GPA for those older courses. I can try to get involved in extracurriculars or get research experience. And so I just decided to try to maximize my time because I knew that, I can't go back and change those pre-med classes. So I just try by far to add as much stuff as I can, drop what I don't like, and just really try to just take advantage of all the opportunities because grades aren't necessarily everything. And you can learn relatively very fast, I think, because when I came to Cornell, it wasn't just learning actual knowledge in terms of what countries are here, being aware of languages or being aware of different cultures, foods, weather. It's more, it was also like a social and cultural aspect of it as well, because coming from a low income Black household, Cornell is like the very polar opposite. The CEOs that you see on TV and the ultra rich people, their kids, those are the kind of people you're going to high school, or that's the kind of people I'm going to college with. And so I had to learn how to navigate that social space just as much, if not more, than learn knowledge. And so, just have to jump right in and just push through as much as you can. And that's basically how I was able to adjust.
Okay. And so since we're already on this topic of like having to adjust and coping with things, I want to read something from your thesis. So in Anthony Jack's 2019's book, The Privileged Poor, he looks at whether disadvantaged minority students have the social and cultural capital needed to succeed in these schools. To find disparities, he differentiated between those who were in elite private high schools, which he called the privileged poor, and those who went to under-resourced high schools, the doubtfully disadvantaged. He found out that the privileged poor were able to navigate the space of an elite institution, who he referred to as renowned, much better than the doubly disadvantaged. This was due to the familiarity with how the school operates in terms of social and cultural life. And this really hit me, and I haven't really thought about this, but I'm privileged in a lot of ways. I went to high school in the Middle East for the last 2 years of my high school, and I got to interact with in American international school with people from 50 different countries, and it's a completely different experience from someone coming from somewhere in the US. And I definitely never thought of this before, but this probably was something that definitely played into how I coped with getting into university. And I was in a predominantly white undergraduate university too. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it was a hard transition, and I don't think that I did it perfectly. In fact, I still think that I probably failed pretty miserably at being able to uh, assimilate in. But I mean, it can be something as simple as, not knowing which fancy fork to eat, or not having the same sense of humor as people, not wearing the same type of clothes, not being familiar with the same types of things. And then you can go up a level, and it's just like there's just so many levels of disconnect. I mean, when people talk about vacation at Cornell, for me, that's just driving from Oklahoma, just 300 miles away and going to a family reunion in Louisiana. Whereas vacation for other kids can mean Bora Bora, it can mean Europe, or it can mean a safari in Africa, or anything like that. And so there was just so many levels of things that I had to adjust to that, it just made it so hard. And especially being really young at that time, even still being young, there's also the keep up with the Joneses mentality, and everybody who's young wants to compete, and you want to be socially accepted, and just like you're trying to be socially accepted in a place that you can't necessarily be socially accepted. Because if kids are going to spring break in Ibiza or in Greece or Malta or whatever, no matter what, like there's no way that I can go because I just can't afford that. And so there's just it's really tough, and I don't think I did it perfectly, but I think that I made it out, and I gained a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience, and so I'm very grateful for it.
Okay. And would you say that your interaction mostly were with the other minorities in the school, or was it like a diverse interaction? I know you're also on the track and field team, so that might have added a little extra diversity there also, possibly, I guess.
Yeah, I think Cornell's diverse in a way. It's diverse in terms of the different backgrounds that people have, ethnically, racially, geographically. I think that one thing that's particularly lacking at Cornell is probably socioeconomic diversity. That's one thing that I noticed. But in terms of like overall diversity, I think it was okay. Um, I think it could have been better. I think, for example, like Black students could be represented at a nationally representative rate in Cornell. I think stuff like that, like small stuff, but I think that overall it was pretty diverse in terms of the ideas people had, who was there, where people are from. I mean, I've met kids from countries that I just didn't even know exist. And so I I didn't even know, for example, that Black people live like in the Northeast, like in Connecticut or Massachusetts or Maine or something. And so I think I'd say it's pretty diverse. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm guessing that global health and sociology kind of like pushed you to think broader than what you thought before.
Yeah. It opened up my mind. I mean, to lengths that I never really thought would have ever happened back just 4 years ago.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's amazing. I'm glad that you were able to push on and expand your horizons. So
Thank you.
talk to me about the double consciousness that you talk about in your paper.
Yeah. So in my senior thesis originally, I had it to where I just wanted to talk about Black students' feelings or their acknowledged experiences of microaggressions and how that affects the way they interact on campus. But then my advisor sent me something about double consciousness by Du Bois, and I really started to think and mull over it. And I thought that, hey, this is like what Black students experience at Cornell, because we all know that we experience microaggressions, and they can be small or they can be large. It could be something as simple as me trying to find a group partner in class and it's very hard for me to find one. I'm always the last kid. Or it can be something in the middle, like me walking down the street and people are crossing the street and you can't necessarily prove that they did it because you're Black, but it's like you kind of know. It's not, you see them look at you and then it just frantically move and shift across the street. Or stuff like you're sitting on the bus and the bus is just packed full but nobody wants to sit by you. Or you're walking down the dorm hall and you hear the doors close and lock as you're walking by. And that kind of stuff happens a lot to us, but yet somehow we know, for example, what clothes we need to wear to look acceptable on campus. We can't wear do-rag to look acceptable on campus. We know how we have to talk on campus. We have the term code switching for it. And so the fact that we have that secondary identity that we can put on, or that cap, to completely shift the way that we represent ourselves in these white spaces, I thought that that is evidence of Du Bois' double consciousness, that secondary identity that we shift into, that second consciousness that we use to navigate the space to do well and succeed in things. And then once we leave home, we shift into a different one. And I think that there's not necessarily only two consciousness. I think that there's multiple, but for the sake of just simplicity, I just decided to leave it at two.
Okay. Yeah, and I thought that was really fascinating. And what it got me to thinking was like when I first started where I work in a building that's predominantly white. I want to say there are probably two people of color that I work with. And I prefer to wear my hair up. It's either my hair is down or my hair is up. And I remember one time, because I shower and I put my hair up and I walked into the office and I think one person saw me with my hair up and I just felt so weird, you know? And then maybe like 20 minutes later, one of the white staff ladies has her hair up and she I bet she doesn't feel like any kind of way about it. But
Mm-hmm.
that just got me feeling like how and like I immediately took my hair down after that and I was like, it's I don't even know what it was that was making me do that, but just thinking about that, the double consciousness and just having to change who I am and who I want to be because I'm in this white space. And
Mm-hmm.
that really got me thinking because it happens in all different kind of ways. And what would you say could be done to reduce this kind of anxiety of having that code switching, the double consciousness mindset?
Um, if I'm gonna give you an honest answer, I think that I mean, there's really nothing that you could do to reduce that besides for being in a space that's a higher proportion of Black people or a high proportion of people who are like you. I think that it's is something that's unavoidable. And the thing that I come across with a lot of sociological issues is that there are injustices and but the thing is, like, human nature is something that is just so hard to overcome. And even in something like, there's a way that you talk with your friends versus the way that you talk with your family versus the way you talk with your employer. There's a way that you would text your friends that you won't necessarily put on social media. And so, of course, it shouldn't be like that, but it's very hard for me to figure out how you would change human nature to the extent that you would make it to where all social situations are the same and you don't really need to change between them. But yeah, I really don't think that stuff like that will really go away unless you're in a predominantly Black space.
Yeah, and I appreciate that candor, and that makes a lot of sense because it is just like a different culture. It's like just looking at everything that's happening right now with George Floyd. It's like people are living in two completely different worlds, and these systems that have been created around just the mindset that has formed in Black minds and people of color's minds in the U.S. is completely different. Like looking across like different countries and things like that. So it's a very interesting thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So moving off of that, I know you did a couple international research experiences. I think one research fellowship in the Zambian governance foundation. You know, talk about that. That was through Cornell, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that was through Cornell. I was participating in the global health program. It was one of the requirements for my global and public health sciences major. And so I partnered with the Zambian Governance Foundation to do civil society organization, to do research on civil society organization funding. Um, some of our key findings I remember were around the way that the organizations found their funding. And so usually you would think that it would be a lot of money, but in reality, it was things like receiving equipment or receiving training or receiving facilities, non-monetary forms of support. And for the most part, it's actually possible for them to run on these types of support. It just has to be in a way that is sustainable and in a way that is in line with that particular organization's needs. Um, we learned that there is a certain amount of money that they feel they need to help the community, but they're not necessarily getting. And then we also learned about the fact that these organizations have been very reliant on international funding, donor funding, etc. There's a lack of self-dependency in these organizations' funding, which I think is pretty characteristic of a lot of issues in sub-Saharan Africa, not just Zambia, but the whole region. And so it was a really great experience because I got to learn about that and see it in real practice and do research and get experience. But I also equally enjoyed the homestay experience. I still talk to my homestay family today. We have a very special bond, and I felt, as strange as this, I think it's kind of hard to say this because people say, oh, you're not Zambian or you're not, but I really felt at home when I was there. And it was a really eye-opening experience, and it opened the door for me being able to see the possibility of me living, for example, outside of the US, or for me wanting to become more involved in the continent compared to here. So it was really valuable to me.
Okay, yeah, and that sounds like very rewarding, and that's something I'm jealous of you. I've never been to Africa. I would love to go to Africa, and I think there's so many dynamics in place there just because we are people that have been stolen from our country and displaced. And
Mm.
going back there, I definitely think it is home in some sense. It is a big continent with many different countries, but it's one home, for a lot of Black people.
Yeah.
So yes, thanks for sharing that. And then you did another research like fellowship in Malaysia.
Hmm.
What was that like?
The research experience in Malaysia, I think, it was definitely very fulfilling as well. I was kind of afraid and apprehensive to go because, I mean, I really had never even, I didn't even know what Malaysia was until I had watched a movie with Malaysia in it. And so I knew the food was completely different. I knew the language was completely different. But I just decided to jump in. The research topic seemed very interesting, and it also was very important. And I think that I have we have to shift our understanding towards of human rights, and we have to shift our understanding of cultural preservation, and shift our understanding of equality and equity for people, not just to our own communities, but to ones abroad. And so, not saying that we should have some kind of fetishization or white savior complex, but I think it's good to at least expose yourself to that so you can try to find and gain some insights that maybe they have that you can apply back to your own context, but see if you could also create a bridge or a gap. Because a lot of the struggles that happen, for example, in the Black community, it's not just here, but it's everywhere around the world. So, we were dealing with an indigenous population, the Aban people. And so recognizing that a lot of indigenous peoples have the same issues everywhere is really important. And so learning about all of these different experiences is good. We did research on cultural preservation, learning about the dynamics of how globalization is interacting with the community and with the group overall. And, for example, the children are losing their ability to speak Iban, or how the dynamics of town or of the villages or towns are shifting because more young people are going to work in the larger city complexes and things like that. And we really got to pick the brains of elders and see what they thought about this kind of stuff, and also look at the way that they understand, for example, like oil palm plantations and foreign investment and stuff. And so it was also a really eye-opening experience as well.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds amazing. I think globalization is definitely very global now, as you can see with the COVID pandemic, and
Yeah.
it will be interesting to see, like, coming with the Gen Z coming up right now. They are a whole different kind of generation compared to millennials and Gen X's,
Mhm.
and I feel like the world is going to shift in a way, and I don't know if it's in a good way or a bad way, but there's definitely a shift away from those cultural norms that those elders and stuff have. And I've seen that here in Alaska too, with the tribal communities, that it's really tough to get them to stay in the, like, well, not to stay, but to know their cultural self when there's all this other Western stuff that is influencing them. So that is definitely going to be an interesting thing going forward.
Yeah. I recognize one thing I learned while we were doing research in with with the Aban peoples is that the idea of what it means to be a Bon is different based on what age you are, and also it it's really complicated because I know, for example, I think I don't want to speak for them too much because I think that would be misrepresentative. So I can speak for myself and my community. But being African American, I know that my idea of being African American is completely different from my mom's, which is completely different from my grandparents. And luckily, I was able to know my great grandparents, and it was completely different from them. And so, seeing how that identity changes over time, I mean, you really don't know where to say, okay, well, African American identity is what the elders believe, or it's what the grandparents believe, or it's what the children believe. And so it's going to be a mix of all those things. And, not necessarily is every single element that the elders had, or is not necessarily every element of our culture is particularly positive. I think I want to do doctoral research on, or I want to do a little bit of research, not all my research, on the institutionalized diet that African Americans have in the US. And it's not the healthiest. And while it's something that has been passed down from generations and I love my neck bones and rice, and I love my pig feet, and I love my ham hocks and beans, and fried chicken. But, you know, where do we draw the line in terms of, okay, this is our cultural diet, this is us, and also knowing that there are some things that we do need to change going into the future. And that's why you have a stark contrast between the younger and the older generation. And so, you know, every story, there's probably two sides. The truth is in the middle, between the two sides, the multiple sides. And so that's the way I see things. And it brings up really huge contradictions and dilemmas. And, hopefully I think that we are a bright generation that can solve them in the future.
Yeah, and that's some big issues there, and there's definitely like fluidity in there and perspective, because we've lived completely different lives from the generations before us. The world that we live in has evolved so much since then, so it's definitely interesting to think about what people generalize one thing as, but different people within that same group think of it in a different way, and that's why I don't really like tokenism and all of that kind of stuff. Like I dislike it a lot. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, let's not get into that. So you said that you are going from your bachelor's straight into your PhD. What was that process like? Did you think about doing your master's, or did you just say, no, I'm going to do my PhD?
I'm really lucky. The particular discipline, sociology, a lot of the PhD programs come along with a master's along the way to the PhD once you finish your coursework and finish up your MA paper, your master's paper. And so it's a program that has both built in. And I decided that, I'm not getting any younger, so I might as well just blaze right through.
Fair enough. Fair
Yeah.
enough. So why do you choose to go into sociology and demography?
hmm I think that there are particular aspirations I have in the future in terms of getting involved in public advocacy, government, international relations, law, et cetera. And I think that sociology and demography give me the right tools to be able to academically and intellectually approach some of the issues that we're facing, but also learn. And there's also the possibility to become a public advocate and become socially involved and have an impact with this degree. I do actually want to also pursue an MPH while I'm doing my PhD program. Hopefully, if I can get accepted into the Berkeley MPH program, I can just do it along with the PhD and just take the courses and things. But yeah, I think it aligns the best with my future goals in terms of what I want to do in life.
Okay. And do you have I'm guessing that you have your research topic already picked out?
Yeah, I've pretty much solidified in my head what I want to do my research on. There are a lot of people who say that I shouldn't be deciding so early, especially since I haven't even started. But I think that I found some research that is really important, can has the potential to be really groundbreaking, and it's something that I really really want to pursue.
Okay, and I look forward to seeing what that just is.
Thank
Um,
you.
so can you explain a little bit what demography is?
Um, I don't know if I could give you a textbook definition. I'd say the best way to think about demography is think about the study of populations, their structure, their composition, how they change, how they shift. I took a course called Population Dynamics, and I think that's probably a better name for it. When you think about demography, you can think about things like, okay, what percentage of people live in this area? What proportion of the people are like this or have this particular characteristic? How exactly is the population aging over time? How is their migration between populations? Things like that. And I think that's really complementary to public health, which is why I want to try to build that into my study, because when you deal with an issue like coronavirus, for example, you could pinpoint areas that are at high risk for higher fatality rates by saying, okay, well, if we know the population in this area is very aged, then we need to put more resources towards this population versus one that's relatively very healthy and young. And so those are the kind of things that I thought about when I was trying to decide my degree, and I think that they complement each other very well.
Okay. Yeah, and I think so too, definitely. Because you need to understand the trends and the population dynamics, as you call it, because that is important. Because you can't inform work unless you understand what the populations are doing there. So I wanted to take you back a little to, you said you were interested in the African American diet, and it is a very touchy topic in the sense that a lot of African Americans are in places like food deserts or places where they can't access easily affordable food, and then there's a lot of ads pushing for for unhealthy stuff like sodas and all those kind of things. It's just kind of ingrained in the culture, to eat like fried stuff constantly and all of this. So what are your thoughts, like, and how, yeah, just what are your thoughts around this so far?
hmm so what's interesting is there's a program that I'm going to do that pushes undergraduate slash graduate students to publish a book on a topic that they want. And so I'm going to use this as an opportunity to advance my writing skills, but see if I can get something tangible hopefully it's of academic quality where it could help advance my career later on when I graduate with my PhD and go on the academic job market. But I think that we should view our diet, the African American diet, as completely enslaved. From the moment that we first had contact with Europeans to the present day, um, I need to hunt down this source. I lost it, but I found a book that talks about how when Europeans first came into contact with Africans, they would actually introduce the Western diet. So whenever they would bring slaves over to the Americas, they would already be used to the types of food they would eat, and that would cause them less resistance and less issues logistically when the slaves were trying to transition. And so, taking it from that point of view, we already know that the diet was controlled from the moment that of African Americans, from the moment that our his, what's the best way to describe this? From the moment that we became separated, our diet was enslaved. And then you look at the constraints that were put on our diet over time. And so back then they didn't have refrigerators and they didn't have preservatives. And so you had to use excessive amounts of salt to preserve your meat. You weren't given the best cuts because you're slaves. And so instead of eating the steaks or instead of eating the healthier portions of the pig or the meatier and the tastier portions, you would get things like the ham hocks or the hog maws or the pig feet. And so over time, if you have to eat that, you try to find a way to make it taste good. You try to find a way to doctor it up to be good. And so once you do that, and once it does become the norm, now you have an institutionalized diet that's controlled that you can't really deviate from. And in a sense, that's still enslaved, or we use the term neoliberal or neo-colonial, et cetera. And so that continues into the future. You have the Great Migration, and that transfers the diet all throughout the country. And then now, even though technically the country's free, even though we're seeing that it's not, you have other constraints like socioeconomic status, where you live. You know, we have lower economic statuses here in the US, so we can't afford to go to grocery stores. And sometimes grocery stores aren't even near where we live. And so you're only able to eat what's allotted to you. And, you know, you're going to eat the cheapest the cheapest food with the highest calories, which, you know, is not always good, as we know. And so no matter how you look at it, your diet is controlled in some way, shape, or form. And the sophistication that companies go through in order to make these foods the way that they want. I mean, they can even change the structure of salts and of sugars and things to make them more adhesive to French fries versus ice cream versus whatever. And so it's just a really complicated way. But I probably shifted away from the original question, but I think that we should think of our diet as enslaved from the past all the way up into the present and still going on into the future. And that will help us understand why our health is the way it is, at least in pertaining to diet.
Yeah, and I think that's a very enlightening point of view to take it from, because it is the truth, and it's hard to eat for some people. What do you think can be done to improve that? Do you think it's more just policies or education or everything?
Um, so this is when radical Benjamin Fields is going to come out, but I think that these problems will never really change until African Americans and just Black people broadly around the globe have full control over their own lives and over their own societies. And on top of that, we we have to go through this seems like a crazy thing to say, but we have to go through a little bit of social engineering, because we have to be socially engineered to be in the position that we are now, which is drastically different than what it was pre-slavery. And so we're going to need a commensurate amount of effort to change the way that we think and change the way that we go about things and change our education and everything to go towards something positive. And so we're going to need complete dependence over our situations. And then we're also going to need a little bit of social transformation in order to get to where we need to be.
Yeah, definitely. Are you for repatriation or against repatriation, or maybe?
I'm 100% for repatriation. I think I explain it in a simple analogy. If you have 10 friends and 8 want to go to McDonald's and 2 want to go to Burger King, you're going to go to McDonald's every time. And that's basically what we're dealing with when we live in China, or we live in the US, or we live in Australia, or we live in the UK. there's no problem with living in these places, but I think that we have to recognize that our needs are fundamentally different than the wants of the people who are controlling the societies that we're living in. And so, in order to have a tangible change, we're going to need to be dependent, and we're going to need to have our own autonomous regions in order to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, it just sticks with me, like just thinking about this, the economic divide, just how the policies like redlining and stuff like that were put in place to really zone in these Black communities and stop them from getting the economic opportunities. And right now, I want to say white families have 10 times the amount of wealth as Black families, something like that, something astronomical like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely interesting when they bring up this point of repatriation all the time, giving money, because when you really think of it, African American slaves built this country, yet they have no equity in it, and that's really disheartening.
I think it's a complicated topic because with repatriation comes just as many complexities as trying to fight for equal rights in the U.S. But I think that with the right amount of awareness, I think it's a lot more possible and feasible, and I think it's a lot more realistic than people think. But we're a far ways away from having that kind of conversation, I think. And then, what's your opinion? Are you a repatriation or?
Oh, 100%. Just this country is it's built on broken system, racist, oppressive system. So that there's so many different ways that need to affect change to actually like build up and give equity to the people that have been left behind. And this is just one way to do it. Like, you can't tell me that the people that have built this country should have 10 times less wealth than a white family. That's not right, man. That's not right, especially in today's world where the US has so much money from all these tech companies and all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and it's a racial capitalism. I think people don't understand. I think with the economic system that the U.S. has, there has to be somebody who's a have, and there has to be have-nots, and most people have to be have-nots. And you can have a cascading. You can have multiple levels of it, but there's going to be a systematic differentiation between the people, and they've already clearly made that us. And so hoping that that's going to get better within the constraints of the system that we live in is just unrealistic. And so people have already made it obvious that we're not going to change the system that we're in. And so, we're going to have to find a way to shift to a place with a system that will work for us, that will not, thrive off of our demise and downfall.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Very well said. So I want to switch the focus a little bit to your running. So what did you run during well, I guess you ran through high school and undergrad?
Yeah, I ran the 400 meter and the 4x400 meter. It was not a fun event. It's very tiring, but I think it definitely taught me a lot of things as a person. So I'm grateful for being able to run the 400.
Yeah. And what was that balance like for doing sports and going to doing your undergrad as well?
It was tough. You have to control every. I'm an emotional eater, so whenever I have problems, I just like to eat, and I have a really really big sweet tooth, a sweet tooth that people don't understand how bad it is, and so that made things really difficult because I can't cope. But it taught me how to balance my life and have multiple priorities. And at first, it was very tough, but over time, it became easier and easier, and it really helped me build as a person.
If I was to ask you what public health or sociological issue resonates most with you, would you be able to answer on both fronts, or should I just ask one of them?
I can answer on both fronts,
Okay.
and I can give a hint into my future research plan. I want to keep them top secret. I don't want anybody to steal them, but
Yeah.
I think,
Completely respect.
yeah, I think the biggest issue in public health and sociology is understanding what could be for people of African descent. And that's the idea behind my future research. So, what could Black health be like if we were in a developed country where we didn't have social and systematic issues to deal with? Um, what would our economic situations be like? What would obesity rates be like? Those are the kind of questions that I want to ask, and I think are the most important right now, because there's a huge opportunity cost going about things the way that we are. I think when people think about equality in the US, they're thinking about, oh, we want to just reach the level of what white Americans are. But we don't recognize, for example, that Asian Americans have better health, they have better incomes, et cetera. And so, what is the true opportunity cost? Is it really just capped at what white Americans are, or what white Brits are if you're in the UK, or what white Australians are if you're in Australia? Or can we do better? And those are the kind of social and public health issues that I think are facing us heavily the most right now.
Okay, and that's very interesting to think about. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before I move on to the last part of the show?
I think education is important. I think education is very important. I think I didn't talk about that much in my narratives, but education is definitely the most important thing in terms of looking at life outcomes. And I think people equate that to degrees, or people equate that to credentialing. But just as simple as, for example, knowing about Malcolm X's history, or knowing about African history, or knowing about mathematics is life changing and gives you so much more awareness to sort what's reality, what's fantasy, what the truth is, what really can be. And that's just one thing I'd like to say before I guess we move on to the last part. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to just challenge you on this, because I know in the beginning of your thesis you spoke about education, and something that I've been I guess researching a bit is so education in the US. The US education system, we can say, is very broken.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk of it in the sense of trade schools and like apprenticeships. In the US, I want to say only 6% of high school students or seniors do any sorts of tradesmanship or apprenticeship. And then compare this to Germany, where about 50% of their high school students do a lot of apprenticeship and junior and those kind of trade jobs and skills. What are your impressions on that? Do you think that if there were more sustainable jobs and like trade jobs, and there were better pathways for people to get to those jobs now, do you think that would help? Because I do think education is important. We can see that education is important because the more education you have, the longer life expectancy you have, which is very interesting to think about. But what are your thoughts on that?
I'm a 100% advocate of trade schools. I think if there was an autonomous region, for example, that was controlled by Black people, and I had some kind of sway in education policy, I would push for trade schools. I think we need to expand the definition of what can be included in the trade school. I think this is going to be a really big hot take, and I'm okay with that. But I mean, for example, medical school, I think the fact that you have to take calc, chem, bio, all those other nonsensical classes is just completely ridiculous. Um, they could streamline it and make it much more shorter and transform it into a trade school. Because if you're telling me that a doctor could pass an organic chemistry test, or they could pass a general chemistry test, or they could pass calculus one, I mean, you know, you're just being deceptive, because that's just not true. I mean, maybe if they are a biomedical researcher, they have something that they do in terms of research that's very specific or related to that subject. But I mean, in all actual reality, like regular practicing doctors and physicians, I doubt they could go back and pass those classes. So they're obviously not that important. And I think they say, oh, there's certain small parts that you have to learn. That's okay. If you need to know, for example, about a specific compound, or you need to know about the periodic elements or whatever, to a certain extent, but the level that they're tested in class, because I took them, I think is just completely inappropriate, and I'm willing to take the heat for that if it does come.
No, and I appreciate you saying that, and I completely agree, because I was pre-med bio, and I'm like, I took all these classes, and then it still doesn't really mean anything, because when you go to med school, you're going to be taking the classes at a specific level that actually is going to help you. And I took so many classes that had no relation to medicine or is going to help me in medicine. While I think a lot of the system how it's set up now is made for people who are just like academics who can do tests, who could study and regurgitate work, when doctors should be people that can speak to people easily, can relate, can have that interpersonal skills to really help people. Because when people are coming to doctors, they come into them in their most vulnerable moments. And I think
Mhm.
just the way the system is set up now, having to do your 4 years of undergrad, then your med school, your residency, it takes away the possibility for more doctors to have that kind of compassionate and interpersonal skills, just because they are set on just studying to pass this exam, and I don't
Mhm.
like that. And it's different in different countries, because in the UK it's a lot more streamlined. I want to say it's 6 years, straight from like your undergrad up to your med school degree, but completely different system. And yeah, that definitely is not an opinion that people would say out loudly. And it's something that I got some heat for. Well, not really heat, but my first episode for this show, I was gonna like talk poorly, not talk poorly, but just talk about why I didn't want to pursue my medical degree anymore. And I
Mhm.
decided not to do that, just because it made me feel some kind of way. The same thing with like wearing my hair up. But then I was talking to someone yesterday, and they're like, "I don't like your first episode. You sound very ingenuine." So I was like, "All right, I got to make a new episode and actually tell them like why I think it's messed up and all of that." So that's going to be coming soon, people. But thank you for sharing that. That's very enlightening. And I think it's something that needs to be said, because systems are not set up in a way to be the most productive.
Definitely, yeah. It's a gatekeeping thing. It would be one thing is if we had oversaturation of doctors and you needed a way to weed people out, but we have a shortage of doctors. Not only do we have a shortage of doctors, we literally have to poach the good doctors from places where they're needed more around the world to come here. I mean, it's just completely inappropriate. And the fact that it perpetuates itself and no one really challenges it is pretty disappointing. Hopefully, coronavirus hitting the school budgets will really make them change and adapt with the times. Um, but I guess that's something for us to find out in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen that poaching happen, because I know when coronavirus just kicked off, the hospital that my organization works with, a bunch of the nurses from there left to go to New York for contracts, and kind of left us in the dark. But I guess that's how it goes sometimes, right? Okay, so moving on to the last section, the Furious Five. So this is questions I'm going to ask every guest. So question number one, what advice would you give to a student trying to pursue a career in public health or sociology?
Read a lot, be open minded, take international experiences, and you just got to pull the trigger. And what I mean by that, you can't be, oh, I'm afraid to go here and I hear all these rumors about this. I used to be like that. And then you go there and it's nothing like what you thought. I mean, I was just completely terrified to go to Southeast Asia because before my program, I actually traveled around and I was just terrified. I thought there was going to be racism. And I mean, I could definitely tell that people treated me slightly different, but I mean, it wasn't anything that I should have been worried about for sure.
Mhm.
Now, I'm sure that major things could have happened. I mean, there definitely are major things happening. We see what happened with how the Chinese people were treating Africans who were residing in certain places there. But I think for the most part, I went through relatively unscathed. And so don't be afraid. Don't make excuses, you know, whether that be or even I don't have the money. You can save up, $20 a week or something like that. I mean, I know how much students spend on eating out and other stuff. And I'm not trying to sound like a crazy conservative or right wing, but I think that if you really want to travel and get those experiences, there's a way, and you can study abroad. There's a Benjamin Gilman scholarship. I mean, Fulbright scholarships. I mean, there's all kind. The McNair Scholars Program. There's all kinds of opportunities to get these experiences, and so just find a way and take action, and you will have a really good career in social and public health.
Yeah, I like that. So number two, if you were talking to someone wanting to get into your position, what advice would you give them?
is this person like me who's trying to become in the same position?
Yeah, well, I guess this is a kind of weird question to ask you, but I'm guessing the transition from bachelor's to PhD, or
Mhm. In your head, I mean, you just have to be mentally, I mean, you just have to be mentally tough to a level that's just beyond comprehension. You have to believe in yourself. You have to be ambitious. You have to be competitive. You cannot settle for less. Um, because especially if you're not coming from a place of privilege, there's already enough things fighting against you. Don't don't help them out. So do everything in your power to believe in yourself, push through, be ambitious, and don't settle for less. And even if you have a setback, I mean, you can make up for it some kind of other way. So that's my advice.
yeah, thank you. And I think that that kind of highlights what you said early on with you got a bunch of C's in your classes, but you're like, I can't change that. I can only move forward from here, and just really understanding and being self-aware and making the moves to make the best of where you are right now.
Yeah.
So number three, what's something you are working on improving in your life right now?
Mm, I think sometimes, I don't know if I come across this in the podcast, but I probably am a little too hardcore sometimes. I think just based on learning about Black history, whether that be, for example, slavery here in the U.S., slavery in the Caribbean and Latin America. I mean, a lot of people don't even know about the things that for example, a lot of African Americans don't understand that just as much as we went through, Africans went through as well. For example, with King Leopold II and DRC, and so knowing what people went through in the past and knowing the challenges that other people who are like me go through in the world today, I just want to do as much as I can and achieve as much as I can to have as much of a social impact as I can. And so sometimes that causes me to be really, really hardcore, I think, but I'm trying to dial it back to a healthy level. So
I don't think you should dial it back. I think we need that kind of radical mindset in this world today.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Number four, professionally, do you recommend anything?
Um, yeah, I'm sure that a lot of people who watch this podcast are probably going to be like us, Black, and so I'd recommend. As much as I hate this, for example, it has to do with the double consciousness in a sense, but you know, you're not going to win the game unless you play the game. And so you're going to have to adapt to the systems that we're in right now until we can repatriate and build our own systems that are better, where we have autonomy and we can't be scrutinized for it. So I recommend, having a LinkedIn, having a professional headshot, having an email signature, having a suit, knowing proper etiquette and knowing how to talk in the way that they want you to. We know who they is, but the way that they want you to talk, and so and being able to use those smoothly and efficiently because it will really help you and reduce friction. Because sometimes I like to just be gung ho and fight and do what I want and go against, but it really sets me back and even eliminates some opportunities. And so you have to be comfortable with doing that kind of stuff until we can build a way, a place for us to go that we don't have to do those things.
Yeah, and I think that's extremely important because we are in a dominant culture, and I was actually watching this podcast today, and they're talking about Jackie Robinson and how if he was someone that fought a lot before he got to the major leagues, but if he did fight and do all these things, it would have never opened up the gates for the other black men to get into the league. So really having to have that grit to be okay with what's not okay to get better for other people
Mhm.
to come into it is very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And last but not least, where can people connect with you?
I'm pretty open. You can just hit me on Twitter. My name is One Benjamin Fields, or LinkedIn, or email. My email is, I have multiple, either I am Benjamin Fields or bf267 at cornell.edu. I'm sure it'll be easy to find my phone number somewhere or whatever, but I'm pretty open to talking. So just email me, find me on social media, and just connect.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I'll definitely put all this information and everything you mentioned in the show notes. I really appreciate you being on, my first guest who's a male. It's nice to talk to somebody else um, who's a male, but I enjoy the women too. Don't worry, girls. I'm not trying to bash you all. But
Yeah.
yeah, so thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. And I'll definitely be in touch and look forward to seeing your research and your journey throughout your PhD.
And thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity, and I hope that I was able to provide some information that was helpful for a lot of other people.
Yeah, I definitely think you did. And I love this conversation. So I look forward to talking to you in the future. So thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming. Bye bye.
Bye.
Well, I'm really glad I got to have Benjamin on the show today. He definitely is a very exciting young black male coming up in the game, and I'm really glad I got to have this conversation. It's very refreshing to be able to talk about all these black issues and the mindsets and different things that go into it. It's not a conversation I get to have enough, and I think it's an important one to have just to understand the different perspectives. And I think Benjamin coming with his knowledge of sociology and public health it's a beautiful combination, I think, because I think they work just so well hand in hand to understand the social context of issues and giving you the tools to actually address those issues. And it really allows you to think broadly in a great way. So I hope you definitely took some value from that, and just hearing how Benjamin struggled at first in his Cornell journey, and he used that to say, okay, I can't change my past, but I can only move forward and definitely improve on my opportunities and try for the best. And that's what he did. And he's now about to pursue his PhD, which is great. So definitely check him out on his platforms. And if you want to check the show out, definitely just the show notes will be on thepublichealthmillennial.com/episode 8. So check that out if you want more information from things in this episode. And thank you for looking at this episode. If you have not subscribed as yet, definitely be sure to do that and leave me a review and a comment. Give me some feedback. I'd love to hear what you thought of the show, and I hope to bring you value. Have a great rest of your day. Public Health Millennial out.